this door is horror. Through this door are bullets, blood, brains, and bodies. Through this door, one guy who felt as if he had lost his career, lost his love life, lost his purpose, came to execute a plan in his heart for his life, but for 2.5 months in his mind. On a cool July night a few years ago, about 13 miles from where we sit right now, 400 people filed into a box-like theater to be entertained. And one person came there to slaughter them.
Aurora 911, where's your emergency? I can't hear you. What address? Theater, Aurora, Colorado. Yeah, I can't hear you. Give me the address again. There's gunshot. What address? Say it loud.
The man that came there that night, covered head to toe in armor to protect him from any injury. The man who brought with him 4 weapons and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. He's in the courtroom with us today. He's seated right over here. His name is James Egan Holmes. And on July 20th, 2012, he tried to murder a theater full of people to make himself feel better, and because he thought it would increase his self-worth. Now, what I'd like to do is just talk to you about victims in this case. What I'd like to do is to focus us on those who were most affected by this conduct. But here's the thing. He made so many victims that if I were to stand here and merely spend 1 minute per victim telling you about them, about how they got to the theater that night, and about what he did to them, I would be here for almost 1.5 hours. I can't do that. But what I can promise you is that before this case is over, you will hear from or about every one of them. I'll try to highlight some. Rebecca Wingo. Rebecca is a 32-year-old mother of 2 young girls. She had been in the military, but had hopes of doing something else, becoming a social worker. And on this particular night, she comes to the theater with a friend. Michaela Medic is 24. She's a local girl. Graduated from Gateway High School early. Took her GED. She was taking prerequisite classes at college. Wasn't sure what she wanted to do yet, but she worked at Subway. And on this particular night, she and her friends decided they wanted to go to this premiere of The Dark Knight Rises. They get there. The only seats that are available to them suck. They're 3 rows off the screen, and they're horrible. But she and another friend out of that group of 5, just as the theater's about to get dark, look back. And they see 2 open seats, about 4 rows from the top, and they take them. The other reason we can't just talk about those victims is because he has said he is not guilty by reason of insanity for what he's been accused of. And you know from the court that that means that he's saying that at the time of the commission of these alleged acts, that he was so diseased or defective of mind that he was incapable of distinguishing right from wrong, or that it prevented him from forming the culpable mental state, intent, premeditation, deliberation. And as the judge told you this morning, care should be taken not to confuse such mental disease or defect with moral obliquity, mental depravity, or passion growing out of anger, revenge, hatred, or any other motives and kindred evil conditions. Because when the act is based on those things, the person is accountable to the law. He pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity, and there were 2 psychiatrists, about a year apart, asked to do independent assessments and evaluations of him. Jeff Metzner and William Reed. Those psychiatrists, those expert forensic psychiatrists, were not picked by the people of the state of Colorado. They were not picked by the defendant or his attorneys. They were picked by the Colorado Mental Health Institute of Pueblo, the state mental hospital, at the direction of the court. And both of them say the same thing, that guy was sane when he tried to murder all those people in that theater back in July of 2012. They each spent a great deal of time evaluating the defendant. Jeff Metzner spent 26 hours of interviews over multiple days. William Reed spent 24 hours, but here's what's unique about that. It was all on video. And we're going to watch it all. You're not going to have to hear someone interpret or give you some guesswork as to what's going on or what was said. We're going to watch it. Now, you should also know this as we go down this road. These 2 experts considered everything in coming up with their opinion. They don't just look at that night. They don't just look at the day before, the week before, the year before. They look at every single piece of discovery. That's what we call the reports, the videos, the audios, the interviews, the pictures made available to them. One of the things that they first considered was that this guy has a superior intellect. Superior. About 9 months after he's been arrested for these atrocities, 9 months of, in essence, being in isolation in jail, he takes this general ability index test. And his score is so high, they call his ranking superior. He takes a full-scale IQ test at the same time. His score is so high, they again call his intellect superior. He is smart. They also look at his post-shooting conduct. They've considered it all. They consider the fact that as this guy walks out of the theater, out of this back door, towards his car, that it is for the first time that he realizes that his apartment didn't blow up, that fire didn't start, that the police and the first responders he had counted on to not be there, they were all there. Now, when you see a doctor's name at the bottom where it says Jeff Metzner, MD, or William Reed, MD, those are statements that he made to them during the course of their evaluation. And what's important about that is this. You cannot consider those for guilt or innocence. What you can consider them for only are the not guilty by reason of insanity plea, whether he could tell right from wrong and whether he could inform the culpable mental state. Okay? Every time you see those, think of that. He says he realizes that the apartment bombs failed. He takes his handgun and sets it on the car. He has dozens of other magazines and bullets for those handguns still with him. Inside the passenger side door, secreted away in the crevice at the side. He has another fully loaded handgun prepared to help him get away. He has $280 in his pocket, and on the seat of his car, he has these things. They are tire puncturing devices, caltrops, and they're used to help him get away by throwing them out and puncturing the tires of police that chase him. So he does this assessment, standing out there, watching all the first responders arriving. Reasons not to escape? Well, the police had already arrived. They outnumbered him, and frankly, he was still wearing all of his armor, and he couldn't get away very well, couldn't drive. So he did the best available thing for him. The best available option was to give up, and so he did. The other thing that the doctors consider is that immediately after he's taken into custody, he's able to tell the police, yep, I'm acting by myself, and by the way, I have bombs at my apartment. They'd asked if he'd had any with him. He says, just at my apartment. They take him in to custody. They put him in a room and they use bags to cover up his hands so that they can preserve something called gunshot residue. And sitting there, seemingly bored, he begins to tap out the techno music that he had pumping through his headphones that he wore under his gas mask and helmet as he pumped rounds into that theater. They also consider that after that, he sits down with two other law enforcement officers and he gives them a detailed accounting of how he has set up his apartment, how he has booby-trapped that apartment to catch fire and to cause injury and damage. They'll also consider what happened after he got to the jail, right out here at the Arapahoe County Jail. For 4 months, from July to November of 2012, on no medications whatsoever, he is, in essence, like every other inmate. He sends things called kites, requests on a computer. He complains about the food. He asks for specific books. He asks for contact lens cleaning fluid. And then at about November of 2012, as we head into the holiday season, he stops eating and drinking, and he sends himself into a delirium that likely exacerbates whatever else he has going on. And there's video you'll probably get to see, of him climbing up onto the bed in his cell and standing there for a while and then sort of falling off the bed. And you'll have to decide what that looked like to you. You're also going to get to see this. It's what everyone's called the notebook, a computation book, a workbook. There's a lot of pages, a lot of handwritten pages. And what you're going to notice is that this book was intended for someone else. It was intended for these three: Goober, Chrissy, and Bobo. Goober is the family affectionate name for his mother. Chrissy, his sister. Bobo, the affectionate name for his dad. But he doesn't end up sending it to them. But he knows it's going to get out there. Other things that you'll see is that he goes through pages talking about what is the meaning of life, what is the meaning of death. And he goes through a philosophical discussion of sorts. He even lists things that he perceives are wrong with his body. He also talks about his long-standing hatred of mankind. And we'll see more of this too. He goes into a detailed analysis of how to attack that theater. Now, there is an expert that was handpicked by the defense named Raquel Gore, and she came and met with the defendant for about 13 hours, and based off of that, determined that he was insane. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the statements that the defendant made to her. Now, there's another handpicked doctor by the defendant named Woodcock. Unclear to me yet how he'll show up here. But he met with the defendant for like 2 hours shortly after he was put in the Arapahoe County Jail, and then wrote a report a month ago today and said he supported Dr. Gur's opinions. I don't know if we'll hear from him. The issue is the diagnosis. Even though you have these two doctors from the state, both saying, yes, yeah, he has a serious mental illness, like bipolar, like PTSD, like anorexia. He was sane. But what they don't agree upon is, what is that diagnosis? This book right here is this DSM-5. It's this American Psychiatric Association book, and we're going to get to know this a lot better. It contains all of these diagnoses. Here's what's interesting, right? Here's what you're going to hear. The first version of this had 60 things to diagnose. This version, over 400, including things like tobacco dependency. They can't decide on what it is. Is it something called schizotypal personality disorder? And they'll talk to you about that. Some thinks it's schizoaffective disorder. Dr. Gerd thinks it's schizophrenia. They disagree about whether it's even a psychotic thing. They talk about delusions, and there's some discussion about what is a delusion and does it apply. A delusion, according to this book, is a fixed belief that is not amenable to change despite conflicting evidence. Now, examples of that, classic examples from that book, could be believing that someone is possessed by a demon, and you're not killing them, you're killing a demon. Others might be, if you don't act to do whatever this horrible thing is, California would break off and slip into the ocean. Those are the kinds of delusions that this book talks about. But here, the delusions that the doctors who say he has one say, that he would make himself feel better by killing people. His other delusion, that he would increase his self-worth by killing people. That's what you'll hear. The reason we can't all have the same opinion as to a diagnosis, that all of these doctors with this inexacting science, is in part due to the fact that he doesn't say the same thing to the same person about what's going on. Here's an example. He talks about increasing his self-worth with Dr. Metzner. He says, here's how it works, Doc. There's a number of people killed. It's based on your own perceptions of what life is worth, and the value is also based upon that person's contribution to society. He says children are worth more than other people because they have the rest of their life to live. With Dr. Reed, though, it's more like a point system. He doesn't talk about varying values between people. Instead, by the time he talks to Dr. Reed, this fixed false belief has become, you could say a millionaire was more important than a homeless person, but he didn't do that. I just attribute it to an intrinsic value of the person is worth one. A child is one, an adult is one. The president, a homeless person, each worth one. What does he think about the injured? What does he tell Dr. Reed the value of the injured are?
Do the wounded count in your worth in that way of thinking about things, or no?
I only count fatalities.
Okay. So is there a difference in the way you think about the wounded than the way you think about the deceased, about the dead?
Yes.
And what are the two ways that you think about it?
What are the two?
What are the two ways? What are the ways you think about the dead versus the way you think about the wounded?
Well, the dead can't be repaired or come back to life or be normal again. So it's irreversible.
And what I heard you say was that accrues to something positive for you.
Right.
What about the wounded?
They're like collateral damage, I guess.
Collateral damage. His goal, he told Dr. Reed, was to kill as many people as possible. But to the handpicked psychiatrist, he says, well, I thought I might wound some, but I didn't know I would actually kill anyone. He also tells her things that he tells no one else. He tells her according to her, that he thinks a master power had taken over, that the world was coming to an end, that others would be grateful to him for killing them, for helping them to die before the inevitable catastrophe. He says he can rid them of their problems and put them out of their misery, and that taking action in the way he did would actually lead others to do the same. But to Dr. Metzner, never says any of that. Dr. Reed never says any of that. To Dr. Gurr says he said he picked the movie theater as the place to conduct this massacre because he liked movies. Well, Dr. Metzner asked him, and he told Dr. Metzner he chose to do a mass murder because of the maximum casualties. It was easily performed with firearms, although primitive in nature. And when Dr. Metzner says, well, that's different than what you told Dr. Gurr, his answer was, things change over time. When he's pushed farther by Dr. Metzner, he just doesn't have any more explanation. Dr. Gurr writes in her report that he used the phrase at least 6 times in quotes, that this was the result of a call to action. A call to action. When he meets with Dr. Metzner, he says, I never said that. I've never used that phrase. And it's never mentioned to Dr. Reed. What he tells Dr. Metzner is he feels bad before he does this because he's lost his purpose in life. He had a breakup with his girlfriend. He had poor lab rotations, which we'll talk about, and poor overall graduate school experience. He tells Dr. Reed he's a moral relativist. You just decide for yourself what you think is right and what's wrong. He says there are no concrete, absolute set of moral standards. It's contrived by the individual. The other thing that these doctors considered in finding him sane was his background. He has had a lifetime worth of social anxiety. What you saw on that screen, this is how this guy presents. Flat affect, not a huge range of emotion, but smart and witty, but more so in written communication. Verbally, to strangers, in groups, he's stilted, stunted. But in writing, he sounds like a different person. He sounds like someone who's very engaging. He graduates Mesa Verde Middle School with a pretty high GPA. But he says in this notebook that he writes, since about that time, I had this long-standing hatred of mankind. He also said he's had the obsession to kill since he was a kid. He sees a social worker, a therapist named Mel Lipsy. He and his whole family for about a year. It's family therapy, and family thinks it's going to work, and at the end of it, he thinks that maybe this guy has some sort of an adjustment disorder. They just moved from up north in California down to San Diego. He writes in his workbook about Mel Lipsy, and he says, hey, it was family therapy, but you know what? I didn't reveal anything because I didn't want to appear weak in front of my family members. And after that, he says, I decided to dedicate my life to killing others. Westview High School down in the southern part of California in San Diego, again, great grades. He takes the SAT, and although his reading scores are okay, man, his math skills are phenomenal. He goes to UC Riverside and he discovers his purpose in life. He's going to be a scientist. He wants to get a PhD. His dad has one. And he does well. High honors, not in political science, in neuroscience, the study of the brain and disorders. And he rocks it. Nearly a 4.0. He takes the GRE, and his verbal scores and math scores are incredible. Put him at the top of the list. So he applies, right? He applies to graduate schools, and he is rejected. He gets one interview, and he thinks that interview went poorly, and that's why he didn't get picked. So what does he do post-rejection for the year before CU? Doesn't know what his purpose is. So he goes and lives at home. He sleeps and plays video games all day. His parents push him to get a job, so he does, working at a pill coating factory from about 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. every day. His parents continue to push him and prod him to reapply to graduate school, and he does. And this time he gets interviews. He gets interviews at Iowa, at Illinois, at Colorado. And he still presents poorly. He presents as aloof, as quiet. They perceive him to be disinterested, not a good fit for their program. In fact, you'll hear some of the people that interviewed him said, oh, don't take this guy. Do not take this guy under any circumstances. But he does get accepted by Illinois and CU. And he makes the decision to pick the University of Colorado because they offer him more financial aid. And now he's got his purpose back. He's going to be a scientist and get that PhD. He gets into the neuroscience program at CU. This thing is competitive. It is hard to get into. They take 6 people each year at most, and he's one of them. Here's how this program works. There are classes, just like any other college program in the fall and spring, and this is where he does remarkably well. If there are books to read, things to regurgitate, a syllabus, things that he can be told to master and print out again, he does great. That's only about half of this program. The other half are lab rotations. You get 3 in 1 year. And those 3 rotations are a chance for you not only to learn something, but you are courting a lab that is going to be the gatekeeper for you getting that PhD. Because in essence, at the end of that first year, one of those 3 labs has to accept your proposal of academic marriage, for lack of a better term to describe it. And if you don't have one, you can't continue in the program. So he has these 3. Occam Klug, Mark Delacroix, and Kurt Fried, all experts in their field, all incredibly qualified. His grades in the classes, he does great. This is the average for those 6 super smart students. In the spring, his GPA actually increases. And again, this is the average for these super smart students they've taken from across the country. He comes to school early, anxious to get out of mom and dad's house. He starts working in Occam Klug's lab. He then takes him as his first rotation, and I'll let them try to describe what it is they were trying to study about the brain, because honestly, I don't know what it is. There are emails that will help us understand what this guy was doing during the course of the year leading up to this massacre. There are Google chats that will help us know what he was doing, because he's different in writing. And then there's his coursework. Hey, Bobo, he says, optimistic. I might need money for a home for Holmes, talking about himself, probably starting in the new year. He's optimistic things will go well. Goober, his mom. They email back and forth throughout this about weather, earthquakes, tornadoes, fires, snow, and you'll see that. In September of 2011, they email back and forth, and that's what you need to know is they don't talk much on the phone at all. They communicate by email. That's where he's most comfortable. Classes are going okay, exams are take home. That's kind of weird. Before we get out of September, I want to talk to you about another man, Gordon Cowden. Gordon's a 51-year-old single father, 4 kids. He's got 2 still at home, 2 teenage daughters. He's a business owner, a real estate appraiser. And in July of 2012, he was the kind of father that would still take his teenage daughters to a midnight showing of a big hit premiere. Caleb Medley. Caleb Medley is an aspiring comedian, and he's good at it. And he comes to the theater on July 20th, 2012 with a friend and his 9-month pregnant wife. He continues to email his mom and his dad, hey, all is well here. And he sees a girl in class, and he starts flirting with her. Hey, girl, got my number? Can I have yours? And so a relationship begins. It will be the first love of his life. It will be the first sexual experience of his life. Now he has something more for a purpose. Not just a scientist, but maybe something else. It's October. He continues to email. School is going well. He talks about his lab work. When he Google chats with his girlfriend, and this is how they communicate a ton when they're not together. They talk about things like Keanu Reeves and Tom Cruise and Anchorman. continuing to email mom and dad, things are going well. Back to his girlfriend, they have conversations that PhD neuroscience and computer science people have. They talk about a gerbil that he had to sacrifice that he named Lucifer. And you'll hear they talk about a lot of other things too. Cannibalism. He emails back to mom and dad talking about he's going to spend Thanksgiving with a bunch of his peeps and my gal. He gives his first presentation, and remember this isn't his strong suit here, on November 21st, 2011. And he gets an evaluation from a guy named Sukumar, cannot pronounce that last name. But he goes by Suk, and he'll come in here and talk to you about this. He's the director for this program. He does okay on some things. That green is good, yellow is something to work on, red is bad. And he gets some greens. But you know what? He also gets yellows on the things that are most important to being a lab scientist. Quality of data. The use of his time. He actually says this guy needs to work on his speaking skills and appear more interested in communicating with the audience. So that social anxiety is coming back to haunt him as it had all through his upbringing. He was that guy that appeared in the back of pictures. He was that guy that was on cross country but never really hung out with anyone or talked to anyone. He had a small group of friends and that was it. And here he is now, second chance to get that scientist thing. And he's running into the same thing. First rotation evaluation from Malcolm Klug. Again, some good things. He's done some strong work, but now there's some cautionary things. He dedicated the appropriate time. That's an effort issue right there. He used his time effectively. But he's still got something good in his life. It's his girlfriend. And he continues to Google chat her. What's up, Buttercup? Start my new lab today. I could be a little bit more excited, but maybe I'll stay with this lab. These are good peeps. He emails back and forth to his mom. His second rotation is going to be with Dr. Mark Delacqua, and this one will be a crippler. This one did not go well at all. In December, he's emailing back and forth to his dad about just mundane things. Farah Soudani went to this movie theater on July the 20th as part of a group of 10. They sat in about the 12th row up here. And you'll get a chance to see this, I promise. 10 people, co-workers from Red Robin, and they went for the premiere because it was someone's birthday. And that person who had the birthday was someone that loved superheroes. Alex Sullivan. He was a big guy. His friends called him Sully. He was also part of that group of 10 that worked at Red Robin and that came to the theater for the same thing. He loves superheroes. When the Superman trailer starts, he stands up and throws his arms up in the air and yells, "Yeah!" July the 20th, 2012 was his 27th birthday, and they were all there for him. In January of 2012, he's still reporting back home. Things are good. He'd been working out all along, but now we take a look to see he's good for 1 to 2 times a week of working out, like anybody else. He emails his mom, lab's fine, things are going fine. He asks his girl out on a date. They talk about serial killer dreams. They talk about all sorts of interesting things. But they also talk about the fear of failure. This is her. He asked her, "Are you afraid of failing?" She says, "No, I'm not really." And he says, "Look, even if you do, you'll still get a good job with your master's." His girlfriend's in computer science. She can go anywhere. But what she reveals to him is what he already knows. And he says it. I, on the other hand, I'd be SOL. And she says, "You're right. You're biology. PhD is the norm for you to be successful in that field." They talk about things like making a cyborg. He has a meeting set up with Suk, the guy that evaluated him for the first rotation. He comes back to report to his girlfriend. You know what it was about? It was about his social anxiety. It was about his inability to communicate well. He says, "My advisor says I need to jump in with both feet, can't tiptoe in." It was an analogy for being more social in discussions. And this is a revelation for him. Science appears to have shifted from guys working alone in a darkroom to something far more social. He says to her, "You're going to go see The Rapist," and that is a reference to a Saturday Night Live skit with Alex Trebek. If you didn't see it, combine "the" and "rapist" together is "therapist," and talking about a therapist that she was seeing. And they joke around about that. He talks about being sick. You have the magic touch of healing. They joke about psychotic delusions. He writes back to home, "Things are going well. Pretty much made up my mind this lab isn't the one for me. I'm going to try for the first one." He keeps sending in exams, and these things, and you'll see them, are wicked smart, super smart, and he's doing great at them. By February of 2012, continuing to email mom and dad about the mundane, an iPhone, the weather. He works out at 24 Hour Fitness a couple times a week. He talks to his mom about Valentine's Day. He's going to cook for his girlfriend. He says, "I got that iPhone we talked about." He sends in attachments and work with these things. I can't even tell you what they mean. That's how smart they are. But he's sending in his work, and he's sending it in on time. He says, "Valentine's Day was great. Candlelight, gave some carnations to my girl." He then keeps sending in his homework, and everything is about the same, ongoing. His second rotation presentation and evaluation, however, do not go well. He gets some good marks for professionalism, but then it goes bad. He can't conduct research. His oral communication needs significant help. He spent the appropriate amount of time and commitment on these programs. These are not good scores. He talks to his girl through Google Chat and says, "Looks like I won't be joining that lab." And this will be a recurring theme for the next several months. He can't stop talking about this. "I didn't complete the main project. The professor got pissed off, gave me a B." She says that sucks. On the other hand, you still have that first lab. You sort of like that one. You might be able to go there. And right after that, they break up. She says, "I don't see a future with you." And she leaves him, and he's devastated. He tells his dad, "Hey, I finished up my second lab. Professor got peeved. I can't join his lab. She broke up with me. It hasn't exactly been the best of time." Doesn't know what his purpose is anymore. March of 2012, he joins a third rotation, his last chance, Kurt Fried. His mom emails him about, again, mundane things. "Here's a funny movie. Check it out on Netflix." He says, "Sure." He works out 2 times a week in the post-breakup situation. He tells his mom, "This situation's gotten complex because she doesn't want to see me, but we're sort of doing the friends with benefits thing now. I try to do my complete disassociation, but we're somewhere between friends and a relationship." He says in his notebook that this was when he lost his last battle with biology, his last great battle of falling in love. A.J. Boyk. A.J. Boyk was 18. A.J. Boyk was getting ready to start college on Saturday after July the 20th. He wanted to be a ceramics teacher. He was an aspiring artist. And on July 20th, 2012, he went to the movies, which he loved doing, with his fiancée, La Samoa. And they took this picture from the theater just before it went dark. Alexander Teves was 24. He had just graduated the University of Denver with his master's degree. He had been interning at a place where he worked as a counselor dealing with mental health issues for juveniles. He went to the movie with his fiancée and friend. He is the oldest son of 3, of Tom and Karen Teves. In March of 2012, just a few months before this, he's doing great in school. He's getting praise from professors for his performance on the schoolwork, classroom stuff. He files his taxes both in Colorado and in California dutifully and on time. He says he even got a refund of $131, claimed himself as a dependent. But that month, after the deterioration of his performance in labs and his girlfriend, he seeks out some counseling from the school-provided service. And by the way, that is not unusual for this stressful program and these high-strung people. He sees Margaret Roth on Friday, March 16th. He goes to her and says his chief concern is trouble with public speaking. He has anxiety around other people. He has anxiety taking initiative with people, but not when he's at home by himself. No anxiety. He said his girlfriend doesn't want a long-term relationship with him. In fact, technically, she's no longer his girlfriend. He says, in response to her questions through this 40-minute process, no, I'm not suicidal, but I've had some thoughts of killing people. Now, Margaret's going to tell you that that is not the first time any student has come to her and said they had homicidal ideations, and that's what it's called. So she asks further. That's important. He says, no, I don't have any specific targets, no specific plans, no delusions, no hallucinations. She thinks he has normal cognition, and he doesn't want to say any more. She concludes that at that time he's not dangerous. He wants to see a psychiatrist. He wants to continue with some treatment. That's stable. He's staying in the school program. That's stable. He tells Dr. Lynn Fenton, the psychiatrist he ultimately sees, he's the most anxious guy I've ever seen. She thinks maybe he's got an obsessive-compulsive disorder. After this, he goes out, St. Patty's Day, goes with his ex-girlfriend, and there's an incident. At that bar they go to, a guy comes up to talk to his ex-girlfriend, and he confronts the guy and says, hey, that's my girlfriend. She sees it, and outside the bar tells him, I am not your girlfriend. But he emails back to Mom 3 days later, spring break was fun, good time. Went to an Irish bar on St. Patty's Day. With Dr. Lynn Fenton, he gets up with her a couple days later. He says his girlfriend broke up with him a couple weeks ago. He has anxiety around people. He then declares, I don't have relationships with people. People have relationships with me. When she asks him about his comments to Margaret Roth, he says, listen, people are my problem. The only solution to that is if I could kill everybody, but that can't happen. So that's not even a realistic solution. But she asks more questions to determine what risk he poses. He denies any self-mutilation or suicide, denies having a plan, denies a target. He appears not currently dangerous and agrees to take some medications and to come back. She thinks he has a social phobia, maybe OCD. She tells Dr. Metzner he displayed an angry and hateful perception of humanity throughout their 5 times together, and that it had been present for a long time. She prescribes Klonopin, sertraline for the OCD and social phobia, and considers an anti-psych drug, but he doesn't want to take it because he says it might sedate me too much. He puts down in his journal here what's going on in his head. He cannot tell them, and he calls them the mind rapists, his plan. Because if he does, both his normal life, the one we know about, and his ideal enactment of working on his homicidal ideations, both of those would be lost if he came clean with them about what he was thinking. He says he doesn't want to build a false sense of rapport and that he's going to continue to try to deflect any incriminating questions from them. And he wouldn't be more candid with Dr. Fenton. He wouldn't tell them, he tells Dr. Metzner, he wouldn't tell them that he had a planned attack and what he was going to do because she'd have locked me up and I wouldn't have been able to kill people. He talks to his girl some more, and in this particular conversation, he brings up this issue of, I don't know what to do. I might play Skyrim. It's a video game. But I don't know if that's helpful. She says you should play video games. Screw the world. I mean, do something that you want to do that's fun. She knows he's been having a tough time. This is what she says here. He says, well, look, what I really want to do, I can't do because it's evil. She says, well, and he says, I can't do that. Well, what do you feel like doing? Video games are the next best thing. They're escapism. What's so evil that you want to do? And you know what he says? Kill people, of course. She thinks this is just theoretical based on all of these other conversations they have, so she engages him. Killing people's too much effort. You'll end up locked up. Most people aren't worth the effort. He says, well, that's why you kill many people. Again, she thinks it's theoretical, and they continue to have a conversation. He invokes justice, saying taking away someone's time or life. And in fact, if you wait to kill to the end of your life, then there's nothing to lose. They begin to have a conversation about the value of life. And he says, what's more valuable than life? If you take that away, you take away everyone's experiences and all of their potential. And she asked that about it being human capital. And she says, what is human capital? What do you do with that human capital from having taken away people's lives? And he says, have a more meaningful life. And she doesn't get it. How does that work? And he can't explain it to her other than saying, this is what he wants to do. She says, it may satisfy you, but it doesn't fulfill your purpose. He says, but it'll still make my life more meaningful. And she still thinks this is just a theoretical conversation. She says, I don't see how it's useful. She confronts him and says, it's not like by killing people you get the benefit of anything from them. You're not stronger. You're just taking away life, and that seems like destruction. And he says, look, I don't believe in absolute good or evil. She says, well, if that's the case, why don't you kill me and Ben, their mutual friend, who wronged him, she, by breaking up with him? Why don't you do that? He says, I told you I can't do that. If I did that, I'd get caught, and I couldn't kill more people. I'd also lose the rest of my life. He says that it's a circle, a tautology, saying that the meaning of life is to live. He recognized that long ago. But you know what he's missing? A purpose. A purpose. He says, I'm not inherently evil. My outlook on destroying life is only plan B. I do have a plan for good. And she asks, what's your purpose for good? And he says, are you sure you want to know? You don't just want to find out? And then she says, hey, can we continue talking about this later? Because it's just theory. Ben's coming to pick me up. He responds with, Ait, you want to come play some Dom? That's a board game that they play at his house, that they've all played for a long time now. She says, I got some things to do, but after that we can. And that conversation is left like all the others. He then jumps right back into the schoolwork. He asks for after-hours badge access for his work. He talks to one of the lab assistants about coming in early, to his dad about a Roth IRA. He comes back into the cell. He's looking at cells. It's now April. He tells his mom, not much new going on. Working on some cells, doing some stuff with neurons. He continues to work out. And then on April 2nd, he picks up the phone or texts or G-chats his girlfriend and says, I can't just be friends anymore. And she says, okay, and it ends. April 3rd, he sits through a class on schizophrenia, an overview. He then fills out a mock grant proposal for a teacher who will rave about it. He's going to receive a grade of A because he passed some other class. 8 out of 8, exclamation point, nice work. On April the 9th, he seeks in-state tuition. And now another possible relationship. And what he's going to do is reach out to another woman in his class and start flirting with her. And she's going to tell you that he's different in text and one-on-one than when they were back in school. He reaches out to her on April 9th. Hey, it's Jimmy James from neuroscience. He says, you sick of Del Aqua yet? That's the professor that harshed on him in that second rotation. He's always lingering way too long. She says, how do you like it? He says, no bueno. He got pissed at me. I got a lower grade than everyone else in the rotation. Couldn't get the main experiment to work. He's still harping on that. He just goes off and quotes random shit that's not relevant, like he's reading it. She responds and he says, yep, hopefully I can still join Occam. That's that first rotation he's counting on joining to become a PhD. On April 12th, he takes another class on schizophrenia. On the 17th of April, he goes to see Lynn Fenton again, and he's guarded with her. He denies any suicidal thoughts. He refuses to talk to her about any homicidal thoughts. He seems to get upset with her because she won't share with him her ideas on the purpose of life. She now has concerns that they have a tentative therapeutic relationship. She says, hey, can I bring in someone else? Maybe this person will help. You'll have a better relationship with them. She still thinks he has a social phobia. She's not sure if he's got psychotic level thinking, but seems stable every other aspect. No evidence of an imminent threat. On April 18th, he renews his lease on his apartment for another 6 months. 32 days later, he would try to make his first purchase for a handgun. April 19th, needing that relationship, he goes to Match.com. That costs money. And it's important to know about the 3 methods of payment that he had for different things. First and foremost, he had a checking account and a Visa debit card out of that same account from Point Loma in California Credit Union. His parents are co-owners of that account and have access to it. Also has a USAA MasterCard that his parents do not co-own and do not have access to. And then he has a PayPal account that only he has access to. For the Point Loma checking and Visa, he uses it to buy the ordinary things for life. Gas, going to Target, King Soopers, ATM. He pays off his PayPal debts. He's linked it. He gets transfers from the Holmes family for money they give him, deposits for his stipend for grad school, and he pays off his USAA MasterCard from there. He also writes his rent check from there, and he dutifully hand delivers it to the leasing agency every single month on time or early. In this particular case for Match.com, he uses the MasterCard. Back to school, he continues to submit all of these great exams. He then reaches out on the 23rd of April to that same girl in class and says, "Why you got to distract me with those short shorts?" making Carl, the professor of that class, call me out. He then works on lowering his data usage on his phone to keep the Verizon Wireless account afloat. They talk a lot by text, he and this girl who you will meet. And he ends up revealing to her, in my 3rd lab, I don't have any data yet, so I'm not going to be able to do a presentation. And she says, haha, that's not good. She says, I can't wait for summer. He says, me too. We should go hiking sometime, he says. And she agrees. They talk about camping. He asks if she'll go hiking this Saturday. Again, completely different to people in writing. How about Golden Gate Canyon Park? Sure. Pick you up at 1 o'clock from the lab on Saturday. They talk about getting a house if prelims go well. She asks, do you think that they won't go well? And he says, I'm completely in the dark as for preparing, because there's no syllabus. There's no book. It's just, there's the whole year, and we'll ask you questions about it. She says, yeah, me too. I hope I pass. It's now May. His dad tells him, job market's really tough. You should stay in school if you can do it. He writes back and says, hey, I asked out a new lady friend. We went on a hike, and it was pretty fun. She'll say it was okay, but she wasn't looking for anything more. He then emails his dad and says, school's boring. Seems like it's a degree factory. He gets a fantastic score from his presentation that he submitted. By far the best response. This is the classroom written work grant proposal class. He continues to work out at 24-Hour Fitness. He sees Lynn Fenton again on May the 1st. He says his girlfriend is going through 5 stages of grief, that she's in depression now. He says, but now I'm with another girl, and that's not true. And that's dangerous because she is in his neuroscience program with 6 of them. He says they went on a date, hiking, but his biology betrayed him, his allergies. And he says that she liked him first because I don't approach people. He said relationships with others usually last about 4 months before I cut them off. He said his lab experiment is not working, says he'll have to make up some bullshit to get through the class. He's got comps in June, the big end of the year oral boards. And then he has to pick a lab. And then again he brings up that second lab rotation, said don't bother, not a good fit. Lynn Fenton asks him if it'd be okay if they have this other doc now to come into sessions. And he says, well, if you do that, it'll just be to lock me up. She says no. He tentatively agrees. As he leaves and they continue to work with the same medications, she thinks he's got OCD, maybe social phobia. Back to this other girl that he's flirting with. He then references to her the same thing he'd mentioned to the prior girlfriend. It would be sweet if neuroscience had an area for just theory and not have to do experiments like in physics, because he's not good at them. She talks about her performance and the data she's gotten. He says, Lucky's no data yet. I have no idea what I'm going to present. But he's got a new purpose. He's going to make a plan. You're going to get to see all the parts of this notebook, every page. And what you'll see is he begins to hatch a plan for how he will kill people to make himself feel better. He first thinks about bombs, but he says no. He says it's too regulated and too suspicious. He thinks about biological warfare, but says that it requires too much knowledge and chemicals. He thinks about serial murder. And he thinks that he's going to do it with a taser, a stun gun that's shaped like a cell phone and a folding knife. And he'll do it on national forest trails. And recovered from him, after this case, a cell phone stun gun and a folding knife. He did more than consider it. Sorry. He talks about serial murder, but he says, you know what, it's too personal. There's too much evidence. Easily caught, and you know what, not enough kills. So now he thinks about mass murder. And he says, maximum casualties. Only you can perform it easily with firearms, and that's primitive in nature, but that's all right. He wants to do it. He talks more. He says, well, being caught, about 99% chance. He says he doesn't have any fear of the consequences. He thinks about where will he do this? How about an airport? No. There's substantial security there. There's also the relationship issues that he's had, and his performance in school have acted as a bit of a catalyst for him to get this done. He also says that it's too tied to terrorism, and he doesn't want anyone concluding that this act of mass murder was based on terrorism, because that's not the message. The message is, there is no message. This is just how his mind has been, he says, for 15 years. So he plans on the Cinemark 16, that century, because it's isolated, because it's proximal, close to where he lives, about 4 miles away, and it's large. What better place to case and plan for mass murder than an inconspicuous entertainment facility, he says. And so he starts to map out the theater in detail, not just the building and the roads out on the side there, which are accurate, but inside too, the different theaters. And he begins to assess them. He talks about the best approach, the best theaters, and he criticizes the ones that have too many exits. Avoid that one. Theater number 10 he likes a lot, 3 stars. He says it's a primary target. There's only 2 exits. Excellent spatial approach. Medium size. You can see here he looks at other theaters too, 12, and he continues to talk about the good features, that there's only 2 exits. 4 exits, 2 visible. Avoid that one. He will not be deterred. He uses the word attack to describe his approach to do this. Here are some of the pros of some of these theaters. That you can lock the double doors, causing increasing casualties. He tells Dr. Reed that there's these double doors in the theater, and you could lock them by having handcuffs connected to each handle. These were taken right by him after the shooting on July the 20th, and they match a set in his apartment. He talks about the cons, and the cons typically are about situations where he can't kill enough, too many escapees. And you will get to go through all of these theaters in detail. He decides to start at either theater 10 or 9, and sure enough, the theater where it happens is theater 9. He also told Dr. Metzner that he'd been researching other mass shootings like Columbine because he wanted to see what the police response times were and how much ammo he would need. And sure enough, in the book, he estimates that his proximity to the Aurora Police Department was such that they would get there in about 3 minutes. And he had to do something about that. He says he's going to give in to his desire for hatred of mankind, an intense aversion of people that has existed for a long time. Hatred unchecked. Now, having made the decision to do this, he needs to conduct research. And what does he tell us in his notebook he wants to research? Firearms laws and mental illness. He wants to buy a handgun. That's when he knows he'll be committed. And a shotgun, an AR-15, another handgun. The wild card for this, explosives. The best kind to get are the easy ones to get, least conspicuous, gasoline and oil. And he needs to get a remote detonation system. He needs body armor too. He's afraid of pain. He also needs to go and learn how to use these weapons. He settles on Byers Canyon. He says the last escape is mass murder at the movies. He describes his planning to Dr. Reed as meticulous. And he says that word twice. First thing he does is he goes online and he starts looking at tear gas, because tear gas can be used for crowd control in a theater. And on May 10th, he buys 2 tear gas grenades. Online, has them shipped to his apartment. There's one that's recovered outside of the theater. The other one was used inside the theater, and we'll talk about how that happened. He also buys himself a gas mask for the exact same reason. And on May the 10th, another online purchase, and has that shipped to his apartment using the USAA MasterCard that Mom and Dad don't own. Here's that gas mask recovered outside the theater, and what you see there dangling from it are Bluetooth headphones that he has put in his ears and cranked up his techno music to the maximum level so that he doesn't have to hear what's going on in the theater as he's pulling the trigger. He tries to get a gun. He reaches out to a federal firearms licensed dealer and says, hey, look, I'd like to get this gun, this Glock 34 tactical, practical pistol, and have it shipped to somewhere near me. He tries to buy it online because it's cheaper online, even if it's unsuccessful. Mother's Day, phone call to Mom, and it seemed normal. Jessica Gowie was 24. She was an aspiring newscaster, sportscaster, and she came to Colorado to do an internship. Her goal was to cover hockey because her boyfriend, who lived in Canada, was a hockey player. And on this particular day, July 20th, 2012, a friend of hers from out of town, from Texas, had come in, and at the last minute they decided, let's go see the Batman premiere. Ashley Mosier. July 19th, 2012 was a special day for Ashley. Ashley had gone to the doctor and found out through an ultrasound that she was 3 months pregnant. Her 6-year-old daughter, Veronica, had been at home being babysat by 2 13-year-old girls. Came home that night, shared the exciting news. They celebrated with a pizza party. And then someone brought up the idea of going to see the Batman premiere, and all the girls wanted to go. And you know what? On this day, Mom said, okay. And so they headed off to the theater. Veronica was 6 at the time, in between kindergarten and 1st grade. Back in May of 2012, now only about a couple months before this, he starts his 3rd lab rotation presentation, and he does okay. Still very complicated stuff. He sends in his neurodevelopment evaluation and his test. Still, again, performing all the functions of a student. Dr. Fenton wants to see him again. He emails her back, why do we need to meet if you can just phone in the prescription? He doesn't want to go meet her because he keeps thinking that she's going to find out what he's up to. He tells his mom, hey, I finished the quarter, on to lab selections. He tells his dad prelims, the big end of the year tests, are June the 7th. On the 22nd of May, he goes to Gander Mountain and, using that credit card, buys his first handgun. It's a .40 caliber Glock, and that's him going in the store to buy it. It's the gun they would recover from the roof of the car, the one he fired in the theater. He says, I got the .40 cal because it has more stopping power than the 9mm. That's why I picked that one. Dr. Reed says, what was that picture or thought or fantasy in your head about where you'd use it when you bought it? And he says, just in a mass murder situation. He got familiar with the guns by taking them apart in his apartment and putting them back together to see how they work. He bought firearms-related equipment over time in order to avoid suspicion. Some things he'd buy online, some things he'd buy in person. And you'll see he bounces around the stores all around him to do that. He sends an email on May the 25th to Occam Klug, that first lab rotation guy, the one that he's going to get that's going to help him get that PhD. I'd love to join your lab. I hope you agree. He emails back, James, I got to admit, I got some concerns. And he doesn't take it. On May the 28th, shortly after that email, 2 days, he goes and buys a 12-gauge shotgun using that USAA MasterCard from a different store than he bought the handgun. That's the one he uses. Holds 6 rounds. He gets it, he tells Dr. Metzner, because it's optimal to use in a theater for killing people. May 31st, he goes now for a 4th appointment with Dr. Fenton, but this time, with his agreement, she's brought in Robert Feinstein. Now, Robert Feinstein is a guy who's not only more experienced in psychiatry than Dr. Fenton is, he has a particular experience and expertise in violence and suicide assessment. And so he sits down and takes charge of this meeting and talks with him. This scale, this score that's used, this guy helped implement it in New York. If there's an article written about Vasa, he's one of the authors. This guy tells him he hates sheeple, a combination of sheep and people, and shepherds. In response to questions, he says he's been reading Nietzsche, Kaczynski, and the Tylenol terrorist. But he denies suicidal thoughts, he denies having any targets, and he agrees to come back for more counseling, which is a sign of stability, as well as his ongoing performance in class. Dr. Feinstein says, would you consider taking an antipsychotic drug maybe later? But he won't agree. He says, I'm not studying for prelims. He says, I've been playing video games about 100 hours for the past 2 weeks. And in response to their questioning, he says, but you know what? I'm prepared enough. I know what I'm doing. I've done this before. I'll be fine. And they schedule a visit for June the 11th, 2012. And now it's June. James, how's studying going? I still don't really know what to study because it's not like a class. But he continues to work out at 24-Hour Fitness, continues to shop for food, and do all the other things. He even emails the video game people and says, hey, can you roll back my account so that I can get a little more time playing the video games? He buys those handcuffs we showed on June the 6th using that USAA credit card, the one he's going to use to lock the double doors to increase the casualties, online. He begins to research tire puncturing devices, and this is what he finds. These are screen captures from his computer. And sure enough, he buys them on June the 6th. In case I had to get away in a pursuit. He also buys a first aid dressing. That's if I got shot, because he knows what he's going to do will get people to want to shoot him. On June 7th, he does the prelims. He goes in, and he doesn't do well. He texts back and forth to the girl. She says, oh my God, I'm done with prelims. He says, oh my God, I'm done with prelims. How'd things go? He says, I think I got about 50% of the questions right. She thinks he's joking. He then starts to take on one of the professors, Carl Fenninger, and says, hey, did he ask you about what this answer was? And she says, sure. And then he's pissed off. He said, yeah, I thought vesicles too, which is the right answer. But he just jumped in, started giving me a lecture. Later that day, he would go to Gander Mountain, not the one near his house, but up in Thornton, to buy an AR-15 assault rifle. And that's him by the counter taking a look at it. Another view. There it is by the theater. He then gets an email 2 days later from Sook saying, hey, listen, there's concerns regarding your performance on these prelims. You're going to have to take them again. We need to talk about this. Right after that, he emails his dad who wants to know how they've gone. Not much news here. He emails his mom about the weather. There was some hail. Tornado didn't really touch down here. That girl and he begin talking again through text. Did you pass the prelims? No. I'm probably going to quit. She's like, stop. That can't be true. Really? I'm being serious. He says, I'm being James, playfully. He says, I'm quitting. Fave red, because she has red hair. Favorite red hair. Best of luck to you. He then decides he's going to quit, and he goes see Suk, and he says, I think I'm going to withdraw. Suk sends him an email and says, you know what, I'm disappointed, but as you've indicated, it's in your best interest to leave the program. That's it. No PhD, no scientist. And what he later tells Dr. Reed is he's bummed because nobody tried to talk me out of quitting. He then has an appointment, his last appointment with Dr. Fenton and Dr. Feinstein. He announces, I'm quitting. I'm leaving the school. I failed my prelims. I didn't like the program anyway. They begin to do an assessment on him. What risk is he to himself or others? He says he thinks he's going to quit and look for a job. They ask him about his finances, another stressor that could be indicative. And he says, you know what, I don't have any student loan debt. I've got $10,000 in the bank. My parents said they'll support me. Frankly, my lease isn't up till November. I'll at least stick around till then. I'm not going to break that lease. Had his parents' support. And they feel like, okay, he's still stable. But they say, keep coming back. We'd be happy to meet with you. He says, nope, I'm quitting the program so the insurance is gone. They say, don't worry about that. We'll figure it out. We'd be happy to still see you. And he just gets up and leaves. Apparently twice. So Dr. Fenton calls Suk, thinking this guy's quit the program. If he's got something, a grudge, maybe it's against them. He calls Suk and says, well, what's your perception of this guy? And Suk says, no problems. He's never been a problem here. He's never shown any signs of violence or danger. So she calls his mom and asks, how's this guy growing up? Has he always been this kind of odd and socially weird? And she says, yes, he has. I've been concerned about him my whole life, but he's not violent. He wouldn't do anything. So once they find out, they say, Jimmy, if you want to come back to San Diego, we're very happy to have you back. And after that email, he knows they know. And he says, I didn't pass. Also didn't seem to have a good lab fit. But honestly, I'd prefer not having to move back to home with you, if only as a last resort to homelessness, because he remembers what it was like at home. He then provides them with 2 alternate emails because he's losing the CU email that they've been emailing him at. June 13th, he starts buying ammunition, and a lot of it. 100 rounds of AR, 40 caliber ammunition, 500 rounds, 25 rounds. He buys hearing protection so when he goes to the range to learn how to shoot these weapons, he doesn't hurt his ears. He buys 2 40-round magazines. He gets a laser sight, which you find on that gun on the hood of that car. His dad says, I'm wondering, son, you might be eligible for unemployment benefits based on what you were doing at CU. Maybe you should apply. He writes back, thanks, Dad. Glad you're over your cold, and I hope you have a good trip to Monterey. And sure enough, the next day, he applies for unemployment benefits. And he gives answers on these unemployment benefits about why he quit school. He says he sought counseling from student health to make these problems better, but he couldn't. He attempted to change his demeanor to be more socially and be more articulate. However, he couldn't make the change. He's pursuing other interests and has a lack of passion for the research subjects. Lack of interest, duties were too social. He has different perspectives on scientific research. He sends an email to his mom confirming, hey, I sent in the application for unemployment benefits to be a lazy bum. Nothing else new going on. He then starts buying targets 2 days later. He buys laser sights, 10 handgun magazines from Brownells. He buys a right-handed holster. He buys a bullet blocker jacket. He then emails Dad. Hey, his dad emails him. We're back from Monterey. I think it takes a few weeks to get unemployment, son. Don't worry. Then his mom emails him and says, hey, I'm taking Spanish this summer. And he responds with an apartment full of all of these implements of death. Hey, that's good news, and responds in Spanish. Hasta la vista, baby, Santiago. They have no reason to suspect anything is going on, and it's 30 days before the massacre. He emails his dad. They denied the claim, Dad. Another failure. Unemployment didn't work out either. He goes to King Soopers to just buy food, and he uses that Point Loma credit card that Mom and Dad can access and see what he's doing. He buys produce, eggs, yogurt, spaghetti, pork chops, all things that are normal that he makes at home. He gets $200 cash. His mom says, have you watched Breaking Bad? He says, yeah, I watched it. It was funny. I thought it was a witty series. Later, he buys a helmet to use to protect him. She asks about fires. He responds, no fires here. He then goes out and buys a case for his rifle and another 1,000 rounds of ammunition here, 500 there, 500 more for the assault rifle, 1,000, 50, 1,000. And then he takes his rent check for June the 29th, the last rent check he'll ever write, and he goes and hand delivers it to the leasing agency without any issue or any concern. He tries to buy ballistic chaps to protect his legs from bullets, but he fails. He ends up being able to get them done a few days later in July. At about the end of June, early July, he dyes his hair red. It has nothing to do at all with the movie or being the Joker. He says, I didn't really have a reason for dyeing my hair, to Dr. Reed. He said, I did it to stand out, I guess, to be like exotic, I guess. He dyed it red because I thought it would look better than green or blue. He then goes on July 1st and buys more food at the King Soopers. In fact, there he is in the lower right-hand corner, hanging out in line, waiting to pay for his food. Later that day, he buys a rifle scope and more ammunition. This is him at the Gander Mountain going to buy it. He continues to work out in July at least a couple times before he goes to perform this massacre. He also then goes to the Byers Canyon Range. On his computer, he has looked up where to go. He picks the Byers shooting range because it's 2.5 hours away. Not suspicious at all. It's unsupervised. He likes that. He goes there about 5 different times, and he talks about buying the specialty earmuffs. He says, I practiced on life-size silhouettes. I would even move side to side to shoot at the targets. I even tried standing up and crouching down a couple times so he could master these weapons. He inserted the magazines and reloaded that and practiced doing that. At the gun range, he'd even put gloves on as well. He would go and practice in each designated area and stay there until he'd exhausted all of his ammunition. But now he had to buy body armor because I wanted to be protected in case it came to a shootout between me and the police. So he starts buying these things. Vests, more magazines, magazine pouch, another knife, ballistic chaps, the ones he couldn't buy before, neck protection, arm protection, Kevlar groin protection. There's 2 pieces to that. By the time he gets into that theater on July the 20th, there is not a millimeter of flesh that isn't covered by some protective armor or piece of clothing. But he also buys some clamps. These clamps that he's going to use for a tablecloth, he manufactures into the device he uses to keep the exit from the theater from locking behind him when he goes out to get dressed in his kill suit with his weapons while the previews are playing. He says he makes his online purchases based on price. He says that the in-store purchases were based on proximity to his apartment. On July the 2nd, he buys some contact lenses. They're black lenses that would make your eye look like it was just all pupil. He tells Dr. Reed, I bought them because I thought they'd look cool. They don't show up until the day of the shooting. Back to King Soopers, he now starts buying a lot of styrofoam cups, Pennzoil motor oil, batteries, in addition to food items. Those are things he'll use to booby trap his apartment. The styrofoam is for napalm. He then goes to a FedEx store to pick up all that ammunition he had purchased that we saw a few days before. Multiple trips in and out of the store without incident. More styrofoam cups on July the 3rd. He starts buying the things he needs for that remote control launch explosive system. These shells, clips, missile tubes, ball shells, fuses, launch control receiver, and expedited shipping. He even goes back and forth in email with the guy that's selling him one of these things, saying, are you sure you don't want the battery also? And he responds after this email saying, hey Dad, not much going on here. Have a happy 4th of July. He responds, you're right. I did want this other device. Thank you. But on July 4th, this is his last communication with Dad. That S-321 firing system, buys it that day as well. Now, John Larimer was an active duty Navy petty officer, 3rd class. He came to the theater on July the 2nd, or July the 20th, 2012, with friends, good friends from the Navy, and one civilian friend. Jesse Childress was in the Air Force, had served in the Army. Both he and John had been working in cryptology at Buckley Air Force Base. He paid for the tickets for his friends. He was a huge superheroes fan. He was going to school at DeVry and had hoped to do something more with his life. More emails confirming the charger and detonation system, and more purchases using PayPal for all the things he'll need to blow up his apartment. On the 5th of July, he asks in his adult friend finder caption, the one that goes apparently across the top, "Will you visit me in prison?" To set up Adult Friend Finder and the other adult dating sites that he uses, he creates a new set of email addresses. His other email addresses had been dsherlockb at Hotmail or dsherlockb at Gmail. The Sherlock in reference to his name, Holmes. The D and the B mirror images of each other. But now he goes with classic Jimbo. On July the 5th, he uploads this pic to Match.com, and he will later join a couple other sites using that same email address, these same dating sites. One he joins and changes his mind and asks to have it canceled. Adult Friend Finder agrees with his profile. So does HornyMatches.com. On the 5th, he submits this picture to Match.com, and then again the next day to Adult Friend Finder. That day, the 6th, he goes out and buys his second handgun, more ammunition, more targets, more supplies. This is him at that store waiting to be served. On July the 7th, he makes his first of 3 ticket purchases. He's trying to get into Auditorium 9, Theater 9, but every time he closes out the purchase, it puts him in Theater 8. This is his first attempt to get Theater 9, and he uses the MasterCard. That girl reaches out to him. "Hey, are you back in California already?" He says to her, with all of that in his apartment. "Nope, still have a couple of months on the Colorado apartment lease." Then he says, "Have you ever met someone with dysphoric mania?" She says no, but she looks it up. She says, "That seems like it's probably manageable." He says, "Look, you should avoid me. I'm bad news bears." She says, "I looked it up. Are you okay?" And he says, "Yep." Then he gets the Bluetooth headphones from Best Buy, the iPod that will play the techno music. On the 11th, he submits this picture to Match.com that he's photoshopped. He tells William Reed, "I kind of felt like that picture would make me look more desirable, seeing me with someone like that." He then changes that profile and his dating headline to, "Will you visit me in prison?" also. He also talks about himself in the profile he updates. "I'd prefer listening to you. Talking, not so much. First things people notice about me are typically my soul-penetrating eyes." Wow, that's deep. He talks about thinking about the future. Mind equals blown. He likes to stay at home, watch Netflix. He updates his profile on Adult Friend Finder. Back to the computer, he begins to research window tinting laws in Colorado. What are the limitations? Because then the next day he goes to O'Reilly to buy window film. Easy install to install it, a sunshade, gas can, oil, more styrofoam cups, batteries, air fresheners to mask the smell of gasoline in his apartment. And then he goes to King Soopers to buy his food, including salmon, steak, chicken, Jolly Ranchers. His dad reaches out to him. "We would love to come see you, Jim. Love to come see you the weekend of August the 10th or 12th. If you have something going on, we can try to make it a different time." And in what we believe to be his last email back to them, 8 days before this massacre, he says, "I don't have any plans for that weekend." His second attempt to buy the movie ticket, also a failure. The third attempt, on July the 17th, he now uses PayPal. And you know what he decides? That's it. It doesn't matter what it says on the ticket. He just goes, gets in, and goes right to the theater that he wants. He buys batteries, his last outside purchase, last login for Match.com. These are pictures taken off his phone of the back of the theater that he emailed himself on the 18th of July, including the doors that can go in and be locked. In his apartment, he begins to set up the booby traps. We find on his computer this image, a story where police found an arsenal in someone's home. They'd booby-trapped the house. We also find on his computer research about how to make bombs. He takes this picture, emails it to himself on the 18th of July. He goes to the science store and he buys glycerin, and he buys magnesium and all sorts of chemicals. He does research on potassium permanganate, black powder, potassium permanganate and gasoline, how to set up that transmitter to make it work, how to use the 1/4-inch fuse, and there's the box, the remote detonation box that he'll use. He then goes to Best Buy. This is actually his last purchase, I believe, and he goes and buys a remote control vehicle. He buys a boom box, and then he buys some Duracell batteries to make it all work. And he buys some CDs. This is him leaving that Best Buy. Last login for Adult Friend Finder is July the 18th. He then takes some selfies of himself. He got those black contacts. He says the black contact lenses just happened to arrive on the day of the shooting. And he takes these pictures with his phone. He tells Dr. Metzner he thought they would look good to whoever viewed them. He said to Dr. Reed, well, you know, it's unusual to have dyed hair like that and contact lenses like that. It's more likely that I'd be remembered. People will remember something unusual than something mundane. He sets out on his bed all of the implements of death that he has purchased and acquired over those 2.5 months. And he says, I tested it first. Just wearing it with all the magazines in their places, everything in the gun, the slings, just to make sure I knew how to do it. He looks at himself in the mirror with all of it on. He takes this picture. Tells Dr. Reed a person seeing him would see someone dangerous, which was important. Because you don't want 400 people rushing you. And it's quite easy. They could have overwhelmed him. He then uses his phone to look up for the New York Times how to post an op-ed piece and a picture, although he never ends up doing it. Matt McQuinn worked at Target. He lived with his girlfriend, who he wanted very much to marry, and her brother. He also loved superheroes and came to this movie with the full expectation in the future that he would marry that girl that was with him. Jonathan Blanc was 24. He is the married father of 2. He had been in the Navy and was hoping to get back in as a Navy SEAL, but in the meantime he was installing hardwood floors. He went with a friend, and they sat towards the side of the theater where the exit was. This guy, on the eve of committing this massacre, mails that detailed notebook that you'll see. And he mails it to Dr. Lynn Fenton. And the stamps he chooses to mail it to her are the American Scientist series of stamps. That night, the greatest mass murder in our memory was intended to be far worse. But 4 providential things kept that from happening. A second-guessing neighbor, a fumbled tear gas canister, a jammed assault rifle, and heroes. At his apartment before he leaves, he sets up this tripwire. It's some sort of a fish wire that he stretches across the floor. Yes, that's his apartment. He has covered the floor in gasoline and oil. There's a thin wire that you may be able to make out there that stretches right once the door is open, right across. It goes to this thermos. Inside that thermos is a bottle of glycerin. When that wire is pulled, that tips over and pours the glycerin into that pan that you see at the bottom. And that pan is coated with potassium permanganate. And the chemical reaction that occurs between glycerin and potassium permanganate is a flash fire. that will likely catch the floor on fire. But there's a fuse that sticks out of that pan too. There's that. And that fuse, we'll see where the fuse goes. He's also coated the floor in a type of chloride that's going to create some sort of a smoke to deter people from coming in to try to put the fire out. Thank you. 500 grams of ammonium chloride powder is on the floor, and he spread it all over. That fuse goes to each of these 3 jars in succession. Here's one on a chair. This jar with the fuse in it, the fuse goes to the top, a bowl that contains thermite that he made in his apartment. Inside the jar, you can see black powder, black gunpowder, smokeless gunpowder. Below it, bullets. Below that, napalm that he made in his apartment using that styrofoam and gasoline. When the fuse goes to burn the thermite to those devices, there's got to be another way to trigger that apartment. Before we get there, I should tell you too that he's got magnesium. He's broken up, and he sprinkled it all over the floor. Magnesium fires are made worse by water, and they put off lethal hydrogen gas. So if anybody wanted to come and try to put out that fire and put water on it, they would only make it exponentially more deadly and worse. But he had detonation redundancy. You can't count on someone coming and opening that door. So he had this launch control box. That ends up getting blown up by a water cannon by the heroes that try to figure out how to dismantle this stuff without burning down the building. Remember that remote control car he bought at Best Buy? He goes out to a dumpster by the corner of his place, and he puts it down. There's a white trash bag. He puts the boom box down there. He has pre-recorded the disc to play dead silence for 40 minutes. And at the end of 40 minutes, it will kick on with loud music intended to attract attention. And someone will come along and find the remote control car and the remote. But that remote doesn't go to that car. That remote goes to the detonation system in his apartment. And he puts it by the dumpster. Now before he takes off, and I should tell you, he set up his computer in the apartment to do the same thing but at a different time. At about 25 minutes, loud music would blast through the apartment, summoning people to the apartment. He takes a Vicodin, and he does that because he's afraid he might get hurt, and the Vicodin will make it less painful. He leaves for the theater. It's around midnight, and that music starts blasting. Neighbor from number 6 is down there with her boyfriend, and she remembers being woken up by it and thinking, what is going on? And she goes upstairs, and she pounds on the door. No response. She kicks the door. No response. She reaches down for the doorknob, and it is unlocked. But something tells her, don't open the door. She doesn't. And she goes back downstairs, and she tells her boyfriend, and they call the police. But the police aren't coming because they're somewhere else. They're at the theater. That was our first providential act. He gets to the theater and he parks in the back. Nobody parks in the back. This area on the lower right. He parks by that door that's going to give him, what am I doing? He parks right here. See where that white car is? That's it. And it's going to give him access to this door right down here. There are limited exits here, 2 on the sides that you have to come down a long hallway to get to, and one very narrow, not often used door at the top. He parks down there. He walks around the building to get into the front to use his ticket. He's wearing his ballistic chaps. He goes in. This is him. And he's showing his Fandango ticket purchase to the guy at the counter, and he says, dude, you got to go use this other machine to get it done. And so he does. It's on the right-hand side. And once he gets his ticket approved, he goes and hangs out in the concession area for a while, surrounded by the people he may end up shooting only minutes later. Remember Veronica?
She came to the theater with her mom after the pizza party. I don't have any home movies of her at 6. I don't have any movies of her playing with her friends or her parents or looking like a sweet little girl. What I have is this. This is video of her walking by the concessions area at night with those girls that were babysitting her. He takes a seat near the front. He pretends to use his cell phone so that he doesn't draw any attention, and he goes out back and he uses that clip that he made to keep the door from closing and locking behind him. He sets up in his car. Remember the heavily tinted windows? He puts in the, he bought a window shade. He puts it up and he starts the process of getting all of his armament on and his weapons. He hears somebody come outside and go by the trash cans nearby. And when he's asked about it by one of the independently selected doctors, he says, I thought it was probably a worker from the theater. Well, what would you have done if he had looked in the car? He says, I'd have shot him. But he doesn't look in the car. He puts the wireless headphones on, cranks up the techno music to the highest possible volume so he doesn't have to hear it because it wouldn't be personal that way. He then goes to the back door and he places a phone call to the CU Hospital General Switchboard, and you'll hear that call. And as soon as someone answers it, he just hangs up. But the second providential act happens. And he fumbles one of the 2 canisters of tear gas. And remember, there are 2 ground level exits. He can't find it in all of his gear. It had rolled under his car. He goes back in. He waits for a moment by the door, though. Goes in. This is this view right here from the theater down to where he walks in. It's like 15 or 20 minutes into the movie. He starts with the shotgun. And he begins to pull the trigger. This shotgun. Boom! A.J. Boyk, who had been sitting with his fiancée, is hit and killed as 14 pellets penetrate his brain. Boom! Our Air Force soldier, Jesse Childress, who had come with his friends and purchased their tickets. He too is hit by the shotgun blast, and it rips through his lungs, heart, and organs, and he dies. Gordon Cowden, our 51-year-old single father, boom. And he dies next to his daughters. Rebecca Wingo, 32, single mom of 2 girls. Boom. But she gets hit with the shotgun, and when he puts the shotgun down and goes to the rifle, she gets hit with the rifle as well. Jessica Gawi, our would-be reporter. Now, I don't have a picture to show of her right now because she gets taken out of the theater. And that's one you should only have to see once. But she doesn't make it. John Larimer, our Navy sailor, he's shot and killed by that rifle. Bullet rips through all of his organs, comes out of his body, enters his arm, and breaks his radial bone in his arm. His friends from the Navy that are there, they try to pull him out of the theater, but they can't do it because he's dead. And so they pull him as far as they can, and he ends up being propped up at the bottom of the stairs before they have to leave him. Michaela Medic, the 24-year-old subway worker who graduated high school early and found those much better seats up towards the top of the theater, she too takes a blast to the head, and she dies in that theater. He says to Dr. Metzner, I shot at people trying to get away. I shot at people trying to flee the theater, to try to go out the exits, to make sure that others wouldn't follow. Angiat Mora and his wife and 17-year-old son were there, and he shot each of them as they tried to flee from that theater. But they lived, and you'll get to hear from them. Rita Pauline is his wife, and his son is Proteo. Farah Soudani, the Red Robin worker, remember? She gets shot and is eviscerated. Her organs pour out of her, and she needs to have help holding them in as first responders come and take her away. The back of her leg is also shot. It's missing a huge chunk of it now, and you'll see that. Alex Sullivan, Sully, there for his birthday. Big man, one round goes right into his heart, and he dies right there. Alexander Teves, Tom and Karen's son, hoping to get married to Amanda with him. He's shot in the head, a horrible wound, and he dies in that theater too. Jonathan Blunk, our would-be sailor, our would-be member of the SEALs, also died in that theater from gunshot wounds that ripped through his head and his body. Jonathan was there with his friend, and he had draped himself over her, and the bullets that killed him came from behind. One through the back left of his skull, perforating his brain. The other through his lower left back, perforating most of his major organs. Matt McQuinn, who'd gotten a seat pretty close to the front of the portion where the railing is, but not at the front of the theater. He's shot more times than almost anybody else. His legs are shot multiple times. He's shot multiple times throughout his body. And just falls in this horrible way and dies right there. Caleb Medley. Caleb Medley, our aspiring comedian. Caleb Medley is shot in the face, and he loses his eye, and there's blood pouring out of his head, and his 9-month pregnant wife thinks he's dying. She takes a cup of water and she pours it on his face during a lull in the fighting to try to help him. When the first responders get there, they grab her and say, "We gotta go, we gotta go." She thinks he's dead or dying. She kisses him on the head and she says, "I will raise our son." She ends up going to the hospital to deliver the baby that day, and 2 floors above her, he's having life-saving brain surgery. You'll see Caleb tomorrow. Aiden Avila Arredondo came to the theater with, I believe, a wife and other members of his church. His wife was the one that left those flip-flops by the AR-15 you saw at the door. He got shot in the leg. He didn't just lose the flip-flop. They would end up having to take the foot as well. But then our third providential act, that assault rifle jams. 65 rounds into a 100-round drum, it jams. And you can see the drum on the right. And he can't fix it. It is chaos around him. Death, people fleeing, and he walks to go down the hallway in the theater to find the light so that he can work on the jam, but he can't. So he drops the 100-round magazine and he tries to use one of his 40-round magazines, but he still can't clear the jam. So he dumps the AR-15 outside, having left unfired 218 additional rounds that he'd brought. Dumps these magazines right here. He then goes to his handgun and he fires off 5 rounds with that .40 caliber Glock, just at people. That's what the FBI did for theater number 9. They tried to match the trajectory of all the shots that guy fired out of the corner of that theater, moving up and around. This is a view from the front and where some of those rounds struck. But they didn't just go through seats, they went through walls. And as he shot at people, and I should tell you this because I forgot to, he takes one of those tear gas canisters when he first comes in and wings it at this exit over in that area. He doesn't have the second one to close off the other exit. But people try to go, and he shoots, and it goes through the walls, and it goes into theater number 8. And you will hear from people who were shot in the face and in their body from bullets that went through theater 9 into theater number 8. Here's the rods that are their trajectories. And he went to this gun right here. That fourth providential act, and the one I can't do it justice standing here with the few minutes I have left, are heroes. The men and women of the Arvada Police Department and the Aurora Fire Department and the first responders who came and saved lives, who came and held Farah Soudani together until she could get to the hospital, who drove people around over curbs and yards and rocks to rush them from places that ambulances and fire trucks could not get. And they saved lives, keeping this body count relatively low. And you'll hear from them. Remember Ashley Mosier? She's there with her 6-year-old daughter, her boyfriend, the 2 13-year-olds. When the shooting starts, she reaches for her daughter, tries to force her to the ground, but she collapses because she's been shot and paralyzed, and she miscarries that baby. And little 6-year-old Veronica Mosier, that guy shot her 4 times. 4 times. I'm not going to show you those pictures either, because you should only have to see those ones. Police try to get her out of that theater and save her life, but they can't. When we're done getting all of these horrific details, and we've heard all there is to hear, I'm going to come back and stand in front of you right here. And I'm going to ask you to reject that guy's claim that he didn't know right from wrong, that he didn't have the ability to form the intent to act or plan or deliberate or premeditate. And I'm going to come right here and ask you to hold him accountable for murdering 12 people and trying to murder 70 others. Thank you.